I used to think I knew why I was so exhausted, and I was wrong. For a long time, I explained tiredness the same way most people do: too much work, too much stress, too much screen time, too much responsibility. And yeah, some of that is real. But the more closely I paid attention, the less that explanation held, because I kept seeing the same exhaustion in people who were doing almost everything right. I saw it in people who were sleeping well, eating well, exercising, simplifying, trying to live with some care. I saw it in people who were not reckless with their energy. I saw it in myself. And once that pattern became obvious, I had to admit something deeper was going on. So, what changed everything for me was realizing that I was not only tired from what I was doing, I was tired from what I was constantly processing. That is a different kind of exhaustion. A body can sleep while a system keeps running. A body can lie down for 8 hours and still wake up carrying what never finished settling. And once I saw that, I stopped looking at exhaustion as a simple output problem. I started seeing it as an atmosphere problem, a signal problem, a mismatch between what the world keeps pressing into me and what in me is actually steady. And that is where this became spiritual for me, because my soul in me is not frantic. The deeper signal in me is not panicking every 5 seconds. It's not ricocheting every time the world gets loud. But the human part of me still has to live here, in an environment that is fast, charged, compressed, and constantly trying to dictate tone. And I started realizing that a lot of exhaustion comes from that gap. Right? The soul remains steady while the body spends the day adapting to noise. And once I saw that, I began noticing how much energy gets spent in very small moments. I open an app to upload a video, and before I can do the one thing that I went there to do, I'm hit with conflict, fear, outrage, urgency, prediction, reaction. I didn't go looking for any of it, but my system still has to register it. Even a glance has a cost. Even a tone has a cost. Even a few seconds of charge has a cost. And that was one of the first things I had to really admit to myself. My system was not only processing information, it was processing intensity. And intensity is expensive. That's why I no longer think most people are exhausted only because life is hard. I think many people are exhausted because their system never fully clocks out. It keeps sorting, bracing, evaluating, translating, adjusting. It keeps taking in a world that rarely pauses long enough for anything to actually complete. And that became even clearer to me when I thought about my rowing years. When I was competing, training was brutal. Right? Physically, I was far more taxed than I am now. I was pushing hard, I was training hard, recovering hard, and on paper, I should have been far more exhausted than I am now. But I wasn't exhausted in the same way. Yeah, I was physically tired, but the kind of fatigue was clean. I knew why I was tired. The drain came from what I'd consciously chosen. Right? Training, work, life. And when those things were done, they were done. My system could actually settle. And that was a completely different world. Back then, my phone was one of those giant Motorola bricks. No apps on it, no feed, no endless stream of incoming signal. You made a phone call, the call ended, the signal stopped. Even the computer barely entered my life during peak training moments. Some seasons, I almost forgot how to use Photoshop because I went on so little during the season. And that contrast never left me, because I was under more physical strain then, but less invisible pressure. More output, less distortion. More effort, less interference. And that made me realize that what many people are carrying now is not just fatigue. It is accumulation, a constant layering of micro signals, micro tension, micro charge, until the body is holding far more than it can name. And that is why this kind of tiredness feels so strange. It does not always come with one obvious cause. It is the slow cost of constant inward processing. Then there was a second experience that changed the way I think about this entirely. When I was around 42, I went to an optometrist for the first time. And at that point, my vision was perfect. It was 2020, and I made my living by my vision as a commercial photographer. And he made one casual remark. He said it was unusual to see someone my age with eyesight that good. That was it, just one sentence. And within 6 months, my vision deteriorated. Now that got my attention fast because I could feel that something had happened at a level deeper than thought. Right? Some quiet part of me had received that sentence as instruction. An authority had spoken, part of my system had accepted it, and my body adapted. And it took years of awareness and meditation to unwind that story. But today I can read fine print again, tiny labels, small type, things I couldn't read for a long time. And that experience taught me something I've never forgotten. See, signals do not only pass through the mind, they enter the body. And once I knew that, I could no longer pretend that the 1,000 signals people absorb every week are harmless just because they're brief, casual, or half conscious. A headline, a prediction, someone else's fear, a professional opinion, the tone in a room, the emotional weather in another person's voice. We think we're ignoring these things, but part of us is still listening. This is why I no longer see exhaustion as only physical, and I definitely do not see it as a character flaw. I see it as the cost of adaptation. Or more specifically, I see it as the cost of adapting too often to signals that have nothing to do with the deeper steadiness of the soul. That is the phrase that is really the most important to me right now. Adapting to what is not mine. Because when the body spends too much time matching distortion, whether it's urgency, fear, pressure, noise, it starts losing contact with what is actually stable underneath all of that. And when that contact weakens, exhaustion deepens. Not because the soul has gone anywhere, but because the human system is spending too much of its day organized around interference. And that changed the meaning of rest for me. See, rest stopped meaning only sleep, collapse, or zoning out in front of something because I had nothing left. Rest became something more precise. Rest became reorientation, a return to signal integrity, a return to what in me is still steady when everything around me is trying to set the tone. And for me, the practice had to be simple or it would just be more noise you're adding to the system. So once a day, I give myself 2 minutes where nothing new enters. No phone, no music, no podcast, no scrolling, no conversation, no tasks. Just 2 minutes where nothing new enters. And I know that sounds almost too small to matter, but this is exactly why I trust it. See, I'm not trying to perform being calm. I'm not trying to become spiritual. I'm not trying to achieve anything. I'm giving my body one clean break from the constant stream. And when I do that, something starts to change. The body stops leaning so hard into the world and the pressure begins to ease. The constant forward reach starts to soften. And underneath all of that, something steadier becomes feelable again. Right? I'm not creating that steadiness, I'm making room for it. I'm giving my system a chance to stop organizing around whatever is loudest. And I begin remembering what is actually true within me. So the next day, I add a few seconds. That's all. A few seconds. And then maybe a few more after that each day. Because for me, this was never about building some perfect practice. It was about giving the body a way back that it could actually trust. Gentle enough to enter, simple enough to repeat, real enough to change something. And over time, it does. What comes back is not only energy, it's space. It is clarity. It is the feeling that I am no longer carrying as much of what never belonged to me in the first place. And that's why I stopped treating exhaustion like a personal failure. Sometimes it is simply a sign that too much of me is being spent living in a conversation with what should never have been at the center. So now when I feel that kind of deep tiredness, I don't only think I need more sleep, I also think I need a moment where nothing new gets in. Because sometimes that is where the real shift begins. Sometimes the body doesn't need more effort. It needs a clear interruption. A moment just long enough to stop taking its cues from the field. A moment long enough to remember its own deeper orientation. So if you're sleeping and still waking up exhausted, maybe the question is not only how tired are you, maybe the real question is how much of your life has been organized by signals that were never yours to carry. Because when that changes, exhaustion changes. And when you give the body even a small pocket where nothing new enters, it starts remembering that it does not have to answer every pressure that passes through. And that for me is where the real test begins. Right? Test the signal. Keep what clears you. Live what holds under pressure.